Welcome to Trust the Profits YouTube page. It is time to finally turn our attention to the 2023 Run for the Roses, and me and Matt are going to do a first look way too early preview. What's up, everybody? My name is Colin Sheehan. He is Matt DeSantis. What's up, Matt?
Not much, Colin. Excited that we're finally ready to look at the Kentucky Derby in its totality. Yes, it might still be a little early, but the field is largely set. The prep races have been run, and now it's time to sit back. Depending on your perspective, the best time of the year, the worst time of the year, everybody's going to have takes. Everybody's going to have rumors, but this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about this Run for the Roses.
I think we love talking horses so much that when we kind of pitched out this idea, we're both like, yeah, let's do it. Because, right? I mean, we have 3 weeks really of a sweet spot right now where you just want to dive into it and talk about it. And so, yeah, it's April 16th as we tape this. And sure, it's too early. Sure, some horses may drop out, may get added in, but that's what we're here. And we're here to give you that very first look at what the field may look like. Me and Matt have done this now for a majority of the last couple of preps. We've been pretty good with our top picks and previews and values. So we will try to bring that along with you as well. So, Matt, we've wrapped up the race here in Keeneland with Disarm winning the Lexington Stakes. Any thoughts, any concerns? We talked about that in the preview about, hey, Disarm's probably may not be totally amped up to win this if he's trying to get in the Derby. And that's exactly what happened. He got third place. It's just like, that's all I need to do to get in. So that's all he's going to do. What do you take from it, at least looking back on that race first?
Yeah, I think, you said it, Disarm finishing third in that race and just kind of, does what he needs to do. And, was not particularly impressive. I think a lot of people were pretty high on that horse going into that race a little bit as a potential Derby dark horse. I think that stock might have gone down a little bit. I mean, it's just a difficult needle to thread to get a horse ready on 3 weeks notice and then get him ready again on 3 weeks notice to run in the Kentucky Derby. The other big takeaway I had from this is just how loaded Brad Cox's barn is, that a horse like First Mission to win the Lexington is not even going to make the Kentucky Derby. He's going to probably run in the Preakness. And Brad Cox has 3 other runners, including a fourth one who might draw into the race if there's one defection. And we're not even talking about maybe one of his most talented horses, Bishop's Bay, as well. So, I mean, it just, the hits keep coming from Brad Cox's barn. And that's one of the big takeaways, I think, from the Lexington.
Disarm was one of those horses last summer at Saratoga who had a 6 1/4 length win going 7 furlongs. And immediately people are thinking like, oh, there's a possible Derby horse. And it just goes to show you how much can change over the course of not only August to April, maybe even April 16th to the first Saturday in May. It's, these many things can happen so quickly. So let's take a thought back. I want to bring you back to the Kentucky Derby of 2022. And we went into that race. And obviously we had a huge upset winner in Rich Strike. But the reason Rich Strike was able to pull off that upset was because of the pace, right?
Yeah.
First quarter, first half was blistering. Some of the fastest Derby records that we've seen. That set it up for a horse like Rich Strike, who, don't get me wrong, Sonny Leone's driving through that traffic. It was in and of itself amazing, and you need that, I'll call it, it is a little bit of luck for the right holes to open up at the right time and horses that are fading back to be out of your way so you can get through when you have a 20-horse field. But ultimately, it was that really fast pace up front that set up for Rich Strike. Obviously made Epicenter, who was on the pace, very flattering, and he proved that throughout the rest of that year. But as we turn now to 2023, that's my first question for you because of what I saw last year.
Yeah.
Where do you see the pace this year? There's been a lot of talk of maybe obviously not as much as there was last year for sure. Can you definitively say with confidence that there's not going to be a lot of pace up front?
There's not going to be as much pace as there was last year. I can definitively say that. Now, it's the Kentucky Derby. There's always going to be some pace because people will want to try to get to the front and will try to get their horse into a good position. But when you look at the way this race shapes up, there are very few horses that are need to lead type of horses. And I would argue there's actually not any horse that is a genuine need to lead horse in this race. That was the thing that happened last year. All these horses needed to lead. They all wanted to get out fast. You had horses that were sprinters like Summer is Tomorrow stretching out and flashing that sprinter speed up front. You look at this field, this is based upon some of the data that we've accumulated through Brisnet's pace figures and just our own observations of how these horses have run over the prep season. But there are really three horses that you should expect to be forwardly placed. I don't even want to say they're leaders, but Kings Barnes, Verifying, and Derma Sotogake, the Japanese horse who won the UAE Derby, those three should be pretty forward. Behind them is a group that, when I say stalkers, they may not be applying a ton of pressure on this pace. They're horses that are happy to sit third, fourth, fifth, even as far back as sixth, and especially in a 20 horse field. Obviously, highlighted by a horse like Practical Move, who won the Santa Anita Derby, Mage, who's coming out of Florida, but Mage also has a lot of issues breaking from the gate. So that also could hinder his ability to actually be a stalking type of a horse. Then you look at the mid-pack horses, horses like Forte, Two Fills, Tap It Trice, if he gets away well, Hit Show, Disarm, Continuar, the other Japanese horse. They're going to be sitting anywhere between 8th and 14th, 15th, I would imagine. And then you look at your closers, Sun Thunder, Angel Empire, Raise Cane, Lord Miles, Blazing Sevens. They're going to be coming from the back late. The problem is they're not going to have a super fast pace to run into, I don't think. So they're going to have to rely on their pedigree. And that's particularly important for a horse like Angel of Empire, who does seem like wants all the distance. And so out of all those closers, I feel like he's the one who probably is going to be able to make that furious run late, because some of these horses are naturally just going to fatigue at 1.25 miles, and he's only going to be kicking in to that pedigree that he has.
Yeah, and you're going to need some luck for those closers too. Not only do you need a little bit of a pace to run at, but like we talked about with Rich Strike, seeing your way through a 20 horse field is a lot different than going through 8, 9, even 10, right? And those are what we consider big fields. When you double that, you're going to need a lot of space to get through. I don't know that I would put Derma Sotogake on the front there, because although he showed that in the UAE Derby, that sort of just fell to him.
It did.
He's shown the ability to win on a variety of circumstances. So if you made like a fifth column here, which is versatile, and we've talked about through our previews, horses that we are really interested in that are more versatile as opposed to needing to be at the lead or being back. He's been able to quicken off a slow pace or rally off of a strong pace. So although you have him there in leader, that's probably based off of the UAE Derby. He has a long striding type, and I think that he doesn't necessarily need to be in the lead. And I think that suits him really, really well for when the gate opens and you suddenly get, Richard Migliore made a great comment 2 weeks ago about thinking about time for viewers that don't necessarily watch horse racing a lot. And jockeys have 7 to 8 seconds to figure out when that gate opens, kind of what's happened and where do I need to be. And that is only magnified in a race such as this. But I think you'd want to be on someone like Sotogake that maybe has shown the ability to be okay. Is there others that you're confident with being a versatile if something happens in the beginning, such as, look at Tap It Trice. He can't break the way he's broken, but if he does, he's at least shown that he can close like he did in the Tampa Bay Derby.
Yeah, I think there are a few horses come to mind that are super versatile. I think Forte has demonstrated that ability during his juvenile and 3-year-old campaign, that he can sit close to the lead, he can be on the lead, he can be coming from very far back, as he did in the Florida Derby when he was breaking from that far outside post 11. And so he's obviously got a lot of versatility. I think a horse like Two Fills is a horse you and I have talked about before, also has a lot of versatility, can sit several different types of trips. I think those two really stick to mind. I think Reincarnate actually is a horse that probably has a fair amount of versatility too. He had some trouble in the break at the Rebel, and really was a need. Maybe not a need to lead horse, but certainly a very forwardly placed horse prior to that, and really demonstrated the ability to run from behind in that race. So, I think there are some horses there that certainly have some versatility. I think, Rocket probably has a little bit of versatility too. Confidence Game, another horse that comes to mind. There are certain horses, Kings Barnes and Verifying, they need to be up in the front. That's their game. They don't necessarily need to lead, but they need to be in the top 2 or 3. Practical Move is a horse that I do think wants to be like 3rd or 4th. And that's kind of where he wants to be, on the inside rail. He's got a very specific type of trip that he wants to carve out. I think some of the closers, if you try to push them up a little too much, they're probably not going to run as well. So Forte, Two Fills, a few others, I think, are the ones that really stick out as being very versatile.
So out of this list that we've seen so far, we have, a field of, it will be 20, unless maybe someone doesn't make it at the moment of. Here's your projected field. What's your thoughts on how many of these are legitimate contenders and how many are along for the ride and you kind of can maybe say, they're here for the party?
Well, listen, we thought Rich Strike was there for the party last year. So even if you're just there for the party, it might just all end up working out for you in the long run. But I do think if you look at this field, it is pretty wide open. And I went through an exercise of just would I be surprised if this horse won the Kentucky Derby? And I got to about 10, maybe 11 horses that I just said, I wouldn't be surprised if they won the Kentucky Derby. Now, there's variance, obviously, within that. But, just ranking right off the top, I mean, Forte, Practical Move, Angel of Empire, Tapit Trice, Two Fills, those first five all make sense to me. That you could make a legitimate case for all of them. Derma Sotogake, I think you can make a case for. I think you can make a case for Kings Barnes, probably. I think you could make a case for Verifying. I think Mage. I think maybe Continuar. Those are the ones that I'm looking at as the ones you could make a case for. Gets a little harder to make the case for a few others, and I'd be surprised if a horse like Blazing Sevens won, or certainly Wild on Ice, or Sun Thunder, or even Confidence Game. Not to say they're not good horses, but I would just be very surprised if they won because of a variety of different reasons.
Yeah, Hit Show was going to be the one that I would have thrown in there that you didn't mention. You
Yeah.
higher? Where are you kind of thinking on Hit Show?
It's interesting. One of my takeaways, perhaps from the Lexington, was that I don't know how good that Wood Memorial race was because there was a horse that ran in the Lexington, Prairie Hawk, who actually finished ahead of Lord Miles the previous race. Lord Miles, of course, goes on to win the Wood Memorial. Prairie Hawk goes on to finish, I think, 5th or 6th in the Lexington. Another horse who I liked, Empire Strikes Fast, beat a horse, Dreamlike. Dreamlike was in a photo for first place at the Wood Memorial. Empire Strikes Fast finishes almost second to last in the Lexington. So a little worried about that Wood Memorial field, and Hit Show finished right between those two in second place in that race. He is a nice horse. I would be surprised if he won. He would probably be my next in on that list, though, I would say.
It brings me to my next question. You mentioned Wood. What prep races have you seen? Because, you kind of do that. Okay, we've talked about being, if you want to call it like different divisions, different areas of the country. You got your West Coast with your Santa Anita, obviously Florida at Gulfstream, and then you've got Oaklawn and Fairgrounds. Which prep race are you leaning on most for your insight as far as like what some people like to call a key race, or a field that was really strong and leads me to be more comfortable with a particular horse?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the two circuits that I'm most comfortable with are certainly the Fairgrounds and Oaklawn. I mean, those are the two circuits that I really feel were the strongest. Now, that's not to say, obviously, Forte coming out of Florida is going to be the favorite. But you can't really look at those Florida preps and say there were super key races. I mean, I think the Florida Derby was very good. I like Mage a lot. But honestly, after Forte and Mage, there wasn't a lot else in that field. A horse like Cyclone Mischief hasn't yet qualified, may not qualify for the Kentucky Derby. But I really end up liking particularly that Risen Star coming out of the Fairgrounds. I like that race a lot because you saw Two Fills come out of that. That was a nice race. You saw Angel of Empire, obviously, Sun Thunder. You saw a lot of horses come out of that. And I think the Arkansas Derby is actually going to be a really key race because I think that also really showed the ability of Angel of Empire to continue to stretch out and continue to really dominate and do it in a couple of different ways. And so those are really, I think, two key races that I kind of key in on. But if you just look over the field, there's really not a lot coming out of New York. There's not a lot coming out of Florida necessarily. There's hardly anything coming out of California. And so you do end up with these middle of the country. I don't know. What about you? I mean, is there a key race you're kind of focusing on in this Derby season?
This one right here, I think we saw Angel of Empire, the way he closed, just to me seems like he's going to be perfectly fine with that added distance. If you're doing a little bit of that final fractions, 13 and 38, Angel of Empire checked both of those boxes. So if you're following something like that, I always want a horse that maybe won its last prep race. So Angel of Empire checks the box there. As you mentioned earlier in this show, the concern, of course, would be how far back does Angel of Empire end up, and if they're not really quick up front, that's probably. I read a comment that Angel of Empire is a little bit like Cyberknife, who really impressed in the Arkansas Derby, then took a lot of money in the Kentucky Derby. Obviously, didn't get there.
Yeah.
Was probably overbet in that race, and came back and had a really good rest of the year. It wasn't like Cyberknife was not as good as what he could have been, but the Kentucky Derby was really, I think a lot of the attention was off of that Arkansas Derby, and I worry that the trip that might set up for Angel of Empire is just not going to be there.
Yeah, and let me just add to that. That also shows, I think, people maybe who are just casual fans tuning into our show for the first time, just wanting to get a little bit of knowledge about the Kentucky Derby. One of the things to remember is how much variance there is from year to year in terms of these circuits. I would argue the Arkansas Derby was one of the weakest fields coming out of last year. When you go back and look at it, I mean, Unoho winning the Rebel. I mean, come on. It was a cute story, the one-eyed horse winning the race, but I mean, it wasn't, it just wasn't that good. And the same thing was true with the Arkansas Derby. I mean, you go back and look at some of this year to year, it changes. I do think one of the big things that people need to pay attention to, and listen, part of this is people identify with trainers a lot of times. If you ask the average person on the street, name a horse racing trainer, they'll tell you probably Bob Baffert, number one. The next person is probably Todd Pletcher. The next person is probably Steve Asmussen or Chad Brown or something along those lines. Well, Chad Brown has got one horse that I don't consider to be a very good contender. Steve Asmussen has got another that I don't think is a very good contender. Pletcher's got a bunch. Bob Baffert's not allowed to run. Here's the thing. Brad Cox is not a name a lot of people know, but he's a Midwestern trainer, and the strength of his crop speaks to the strength of that Arkansas and Fairgrounds circuit, because that's where he runs his horses. And he's just got a slew of good ones. And so I think that's why that prep circuit just got so much better after 1 year. So I think that's why you have to take a look at those two as being very serious. Whereas in previous years, you're looking at California, you're looking at Florida, maybe you're looking at New York.
The Arkansas Derby between 1980 and 2019 has produced 113 Kentucky Derby starters, and some of the champions or classic winners include a Fleet Alex, Curlin, Summerbird, American Pharaoh, Whitmore, Classic Empire, Country House, Creator, and Probable. So Arkansas is not shy at producing some horses that are going to come in and make an impact, not necessarily in the Derby, but it could also be in one of these further races along the Triple Crown or classics. The Florida Derby, over a span of 65 years, has produced the most Kentucky Derby winners on 24 occasions, I believe, and that is obviously where Forte has come from. But enough about North America or America. Last year, the big story was, and of course, that was coming off of the Breeders' Cup, where we had two horses from Japan crash in at huge numbers. Yep. And you then go fast forward to May into the Kentucky Derby, and we heard about Crown Pride, Summer is Tomorrow, and all their crazy antics of training in the morning and going to the chute and walking around and doing circles for like an hour. And I'm sure there will be no shy of those angles again this year. Obviously, we talked a little bit about Dermot Sotogake coming from the UAE Derby. But I'm curious how you, who is someone that follows these international races a lot more than me and probably a lot more than a lot of people, I want to say we heard this story last year. This is the year for Japan. And how should I be thinking differently this year? Because I feel like I've already heard this and I don't want to spend my money again and be disappointed.
Now, it's understandable. I think this is a great example where every year is different to every other year. And this year, the pace sets up really nicely for a horse like Dermot Sotogake. We talked about his versatility. He can be forward, he can be mid-pack, he can stalk, he can do a lot of different things. Continuar, another excellent horse trained by one of the best, Yoshida Yahagi, one of the absolute best trainers in the business. And so this is a year where I feel like we don't have a lot of dominant American horses. We also have a pace setup that a forwardly placed horse is probably going to do pretty well. We've also seen this continued progression of Japan breeding better and better and better dirt horses. I cannot emphasize enough that Dermot Sotogake is a better version of Crown Pride, and he's not going to get gobbled up by that early speed like Crown Pride did last year. Continuar is a better version of anything that we've seen previously from Japan. Now, the question is always going to be, how do they handle the travel? They're already over here at Churchill, but how do they handle it? How do they handle the surface? Obviously. How do they handle the crowd noise, the atmosphere, etc.? But, I mean, it's going to happen. And whether it's this year, next year, 3, 5 years from now, Japan is going to break through because that's just the trend of history right now that they are on. They are breeding a better caliber of horse than we're doing here in the United States. And it's only a matter of time before they win one of these things. You saw that, quite frankly, by Mandarin Hero finishing second at the Santa Anita Derby just a couple weeks ago. So if people who want to support Derma Sotogake, I can't argue with it. Same thing with Continuar. Demand a little bit of a price. I mean, if they start getting bet down to an unreasonable amount, then it may not be a good value play. But I think Derma Sotogake 8-1 or higher, you got to play. I think Continuar at probably 15-1, 20-1 or higher. You got to play. Those are really, really good horses that absolutely belong in this field, and the race is going to set up for them.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind, Christophe Lemaire rode Crown Pride last year. He did not ride Crown Pride prior to the Kentucky Derby.
Mm-hmm.
Christophe Lemaire now has one ride over riding Derma Sotogake, so he has that experience of the horse. He also has the experience of what happened last year in the Kentucky Derby, because that was his first Kentucky Derby, so realizing maybe I shouldn't go 21, 40, whatever.
Yeah.
40,
No, it was,
yeah.
but a lot of that was Summer is Tomorrow, just gunning it from the inside and going, and then Crown Pride going with her and everybody else. I mean, Messier and all these other horses were going right up there with them. And it just set unreasonable fractions. And it just looking at the pace scenario this year, you just don't see it. And even if we expect, yes, people are going to be jockeying for positions and the pace will probably be a little bit faster than maybe we project on paper, it's still not going to be very fast. It's certainly not going to be anywhere near last year. And it's going to allow a horse like Derma Sotogake, who's versatile. And Lemaire is, we should mention, I mean, he's a superstar jockey in Japan. I mean, he rides so many Group and Grade 1 winners over there. It's not like he's some inexperienced jockey coming over who's going to be kind of overwhelmed by the moment. He's ridden in his fair share of big races and gotten a lot of wins. So he knows what he's doing. And that 7-8 seconds that you mentioned that Richie Migliori talked about, he knows what he's doing in that 7-8 seconds.
Derma also has a win over the dirt in Japan, which those previous horses that came over did not have. One last thing we like to check out is the Brisnet Prime Power rankings. I always talk about, that 10-point spread from top to see how far it goes down and it covers. You've highlighted the horses that we imagine to be, at least at this moment, in the starting gate. So this gives you 20 of the top. I don't know how many are on here. But obviously Forte is right there at the top with a 158. You gave me an interesting tidbit about Forte and his Breeders' Cup Futurity that I'll let you bring up because I'm banned. But what do you think about these prime power numbers and maybe some of the speed figures that these horses have put up?
Well, it's interesting. Forte obviously really burst onto the scene in many ways and was, kind of considered one of the top 2-year-olds based upon that Breeders' Futurity. But it's interesting from a Timeform US standpoint, when they calculated the speed figures in that race, the horse that finished second that day, Loggins, actually recorded a higher speed figure than Forte in that race. Now, Forte's come back to run higher speed figures since then, but it just goes to show sometimes a horse that finishes second, when you look at these speed figure numbers, prime power rankings, things like that, sometimes a second place performance can actually outweigh a first place performance. That's very possible. But, obviously Forte, the class of this group in terms of having an 8-point gap over Tapit Trice, who's next. What's interesting, though, is from Tapit Trice all the way down to really like Blazing Sevens, even Lord Miles and Kingsbarn, there's not a ton of variation there. And so, just so the people at home understand, the next horses that would draw into this race, if there are defections, would be Cyclone Mischief and Skinner from this particular list. So those are two other horses to certainly consider and look at. And Jace's Road on the downside by Disarm there at the bottom. But, it shows just how competitive this field really is, I think.
Yeah, and I always look at these numbers and they're always so right about how you're kind of feeling, right? It's always been Forte, Forte, Forte. He slipped up a little bit in the Florida Derby, but we talked about how close of a crop of 3-year-olds they all are from a talent. And you talked about maybe 10 horses winning. Yeah. And, you could very easily just look at these numbers and go, okay, Forte's clearly had a pretty superior races so far, and then it looks pretty muddy from there on out, and that's exactly kind of what's played out. And I think that the numbers there always do give you a good sense of what it could be. Last thing we'll check out is those speed figures that you talked about with Forte getting 123. These are time formed. What's the important note here on using time form compared to the other speed figures?
It's just a slightly different calculation. They take pace into consideration, I think, a lot more than some others do. Craig Milkowski does a great job with calculating these. And the other thing that's important to point out is they're really one of the few organizations that has Derma Sotogake and Continuar and the proper numbers from those races in the UAE Derby so that you can really do an apples to apples comparison. Because if you look at Bayer, if you look at Brisnet, sometimes there's an NA or they're using some different rating. And so it's hard to really compare that speed figure that they got in the UAE Derby to how our horses in America and the United States have been training and running in those prep races. But here you see again, the muddled mess to some extent. I mean, there's not a lot of separation. And this is what we should mention the best speed figure from a Timeform US standpoint that these horses have recorded, not necessarily their last. So Forte 123, Practical Move, Two Fills, Derma Sotogake, all there at 121. Angel Empire Confidence Game right there. I mean, all the horses we ran down as being really big contenders right there. Really, the only horse that's an anomaly that we both think might have a chance is Kings Barnes, who's recorded a rather slow speed figure, and that's based upon how slow that pace was in the Louisiana Derby that day. But obviously, if he's able to walk the dog again up front, might just have a chance to do the exact same thing he did in the Louisiana Derby and pull away from the field late. But it really does show how much parity there is in this particular 3-year-old crop.
We'll do another version of this once we get closer and the post positions come out. And I'll put you on the spot here because we didn't talk about this. And I think you just answered what my smart question was going to be. But if you had to take a horse on the right column to win the Kentucky Derby, which one would you go with? And let's see if you go with Kings Barn.
I probably won't actually.
Okay.
I will actually go with from the right side. I'm going to say Continuar. I think would be the horse that I would go with from the right side. What about yourself?
Team Japan over here.
Yeah.
Who would you take on the left side, Matt?
Well, I'm going to take Derma, but I will say, I mean, Two Fills is like very, very close to my heart. I mean, and
yeah.
I think, again, way too early, but I'm going to be boxing some variation or using some variation of Forte, Two Fills, Derma, Angel of Empire as kind of my exacta in some capacity. I mean, I think those are kind of the four that I'm really interested in. Mage maybe as well, and slip in a little bit there. But it's a race where you could very easily spread, but it's a race that's going to be a lot of fun to talk about as we get up closer to it, and certainly going to be a lot of fun to watch the first Saturday in May.
Yeah, if I had to pick one on the right side, I'd probably go Reincarnate again. And I've been on this horse probably more than I should. The last race left a lot to be desired. Obviously, wasn't really even close to Angel of Empire. Probably should have beat a horse like King Russell, I would think. He was prominent. He just came up empty.
Yeah.
He has the good Magic Curlin sire line, so you would think the distance wouldn't be a problem. This is the one horse that was trained by Bob Baffert moving to the Yakteen barn, and you've got me thinking about that angle, and maybe that's why suddenly the distance is becoming an issue. The other one maybe would be Sun Thunder for me, another horse I kind of had pegged really early on in that. And as you said, these horses kind of get to your heart. And when you look at the list of like, who did we like early? Well, we all had Verifying. We obviously all had Forte. I liked Sun Thunder pretty low on my list. I had Disarm at one point as well. El Hombre was very quick with Tap It Trice.
Yep.
So it's fun to see some of the ones that we really have kind of been paying attention to much earlier than, if you go back and watch our first top 10s or for your first list of the top 25. It's always an interesting soap opera to go back and go, oh, look, we did have this one, and we had Forte since day one. So
we had Forte since day one. I think we had Practical Move up there. We had Two Fills very early. We had a horse like Hit Show, Tap It Trice, Verifying. I mean, we had a lot of horses on our top 25 who ended up, our very initial top 25 who ended up in the starting gate of the Kentucky Derby. So not going to say we were some great prognosticators there, but it does show that, paying attention to this stuff for a long time helps. And then now it gets to this point where now you're evaluating all of these horses. It helps that you've watched all these prep races. You've watched how they've trained. You've watched the different trips they've carved out, and you get a sense of how they need the angles that they need to play to win this particular race.
All right, 1 minute left in the show, so you got to be quick with this one. If we switched Mage and Rocket Can, because they both have the same speed figure, does that change your decision on the right column?
Totally. I would totally pick Mage.
Okay, there we go. See, Matt can be quick if we put him on the spot. Thanks so much for doing this again, Matt. I love talking this race with you. I love talking horses with you. Hopefully everybody enjoys listening. Please like and subscribe. It does so much for us. We have seen tremendous growth. I think over 1,500 subscribers that are new to our channel since the beginning of this year. So we thank all of you. Stick to the Trust the Profits here for live shows, capping the card, doubling down's not in the red. So we are continuing forward. And until next time, he's Matt DeSantis. I'm Colin Sheehan. And Matt, what's the going out?
It's now post time.